The story of Henry VIII and his 6 wives is one of the most infamous sagas in history, marked by political intrigue, religious turmoil, and personal tragedy. Among these women, Katherine Parr holds a unique place, not as a tragic victim like Anne Boleyn or Catherine Howard, nor as a political pawn like Anne of Cleves, but as a woman who navigated the treacherous waters of Tudor England with remarkable intelligence and resilience. Yet beneath her image as the queen who survived lay a far darker truth. Katherine Parr was not just Henry VIII's last wife. She was a woman with ambitions, secrets, and a precarious position in a court that had already seen 2 queens executed. Her story is one of survival, but also of loss, heartbreak, and betrayal. Katherine Parr was a woman ahead of her time. She was well-educated, multilingual, and deeply invested in religious reform, qualities that made her both an asset and a target. Raised by a formidable mother, she developed the intellectual rigor and political savvy necessary to survive a court where even the smallest misstep could lead to disaster. While history often remembers Katherine Parr as the wife who outlived Henry VIII, this title does not do justice to the immense challenges she faced. She was the first English queen to publish a book under her own name, a remarkable achievement in a male-dominated society. She played a crucial role in reconciling the fractured Tudor family, ensuring that Henry's daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, remained in the line of succession. Her influence on Elizabeth III was particularly profound, helping shape the future queen's intellectual and religious development. However, her position as queen was not without peril. Her Protestant beliefs put her at direct odds with powerful Catholic factions at court, and at one point, her enemies came dangerously close to having her arrested and executed. As we delve into Katherine Parr's life, we will uncover not only her remarkable survival, but also the tragic elements of her story. She may have escaped Henry's wrath, but her life after his death was far from peaceful. Her long-awaited love story with Thomas Seymour ended in scandal and betrayal, and her final days were marred by illness and disillusionment. In the end, Katherine Parr's life was defined by both triumph and tragedy, making her one of the most compelling figures of the Tudor era. This is the story of a woman who played the game of survival at the highest stakes and won only to pay a heavy price. Katherine Parr lived an extraordinary life for a woman in Tudor England, having been married 4 times, making her the country's most married queen in that aspect. Henry VIII, who married 6 times, met his match when he encountered her. Katherine was raised as the oldest child of her imposing single mother, Maud Green, a woman of great intellect. Maud was entrusted by the Queen to oversee the court school. Like her mother, Katherine was exceptionally learned. She possessed a passion for languages and was fluent in French, Latin, and Italian. Upon becoming queen, she dedicated herself to learning Spanish, eventually authoring the first book published by a woman in the English language, which is truly remarkable. When Katherine was a young girl, she made an uncanny prediction about her future. At the age of 17, Katherine entered her first of 4 marriages, but the union was destined for a heartbreaking conclusion. His name was Sir Edward Berg, and it should have been a fairy tale romance appropriate for her age from a wealthy family and a knight. However, he was unfortunately in poor health and passed away just 4 years after their wedding. At 21, Katherine was a young and childless widow, forced to start anew. Just 1 year later, in 1534, she married John Neville, the 3rd Baron Latimer. Unlike her first husband, this one was independently wealthy and twice her age, which aligns with the young widow image often associated with Katherine. But this marriage placed her in grave danger. During the 1536 Northern Uprisings, Katherine and her stepchildren from her second husband were taken hostage. The rebels informed Lord Latimer that he had to return home or they would kill Katherine and his children. Latimer somehow managed to persuade the rebels to release them, which was a miracle. Their easy release aroused suspicion among many, including the king himself. Was Katherine's husband truly a victim or a co-conspirator with the Northerners? While no charges were brought against Lord Latimer, the damage was done. His reputation suffered irreparable harm, and the family fled south to avoid the judgment of their peers. Soon after, Lord Latimer fell ill and passed away in 1543, leaving Katherine a childless widow once more. However, her situation was now different. At 31, she was finally wealthy enough to marry on her own terms, and fortunately, she had excellent connections to re-enter the right social circles. Her mother had been a friend of Henry VIII's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, Additionally, Catherine had been best friends with Henry's eldest daughter, Mary Tudor, when she was younger. It was through Mary's social circles that Catherine caught Henry VIII's eye. This must have created a very awkward situation, considering she was only 4 years older than Mary and had even met Henry as a child. But Catherine stood out in many ways. She had bright hazel eyes and great height. According to some sources, she stood as tall as 5'10", which was very tall for a woman in Tudor England. Being very tall himself, perhaps Henry liked the idea of finally seeing eye to eye with a companion. But the king wasn't the only man interested in her. The brother of Henry's third wife, Thomas Seymour, was also a serious contender for her heart. In fact, Catherine was deeply in love with him and had begun serious discussions about marriage. This enraged Henry because he wanted Catherine for himself and could not bear the thought of losing to another man. So, when he asked her to become his sixth wife, Catherine was placed in a terrifying position. Although Catherine felt Thomas Seymour was the love of her life, it was made clear to her that her reluctance to accept the king as her husband was defying God's will. Seymour was by all accounts handsome, charming, and about Catherine's age. On the other hand, Henry didn't exactly possess any of these qualities at that time, but his other attributes must have been very hard to pass up for Catherine. The smart choice won out over the passionate one, but a letter where she ultimately rejects Seymour reveals her true preferences. She wrote, "My mind was fully bent to marry you before any man I knew. Howbeit God made that impossible which seemed to me most impossible." Despite the fact that his minister was blackmailing her, Henry VIII had plans for Katherine Parr even before her second husband passed away. He sent her gifts of pleats and sleeves as well as stylish Italian gowns. At this point, the king was quite old but still determined to get what he wanted. The two married on July 12, 1543, just 4 months after her second husband's death. Catherine became the first Queen of England, also titled Queen of Ireland. Henry had just adopted the title of Ireland's king. While Katherine Parr was Henry VIII's last wife, there was still another surviving wife lurking around, Anne of Cleves, wife number 4. She was alive, well-favored, and still living in England, but she disliked Catherine. While Anne had gotten along with wife number 5, Catherine Howard, who weirdly supplanted Anne, she didn't think very highly of wife number 6. Apparently, Anne didn't think that Catherine was pretty enough to replace her, and she made her feelings very well known, saying, "A fine burden Madame Catherine has taken upon herself." But clearly, Catherine paid this insult little attention. Unlike Anne, she proved to be an adept nursemaid for Henry's body and spirits. She not only soothed and attended to his leg ulcers herself, but she also convinced him to finally ditch his vanity and embrace his reading glasses. No small feat for the wife of an unruly king. Catherine's official badge featured a lad maiden rising from a large Tudor rose. Her official queen's motto was, "To be useful in all I do." As queen, her Protestant sympathies were readily apparent. She not only secured the release of several Protestant prisoners, but she also placed leading Protestant scholars in the household of her stepson, Prince Edward, thereby ensuring a future for the reformers. But these power plays would have some seriously dark consequences down the line. While Catherine and Henry's marriage was pretty solid, those in his court had gotten used to switching things up on the regular, what with the revolving cast of wives who had come before her. In 1546, there was a failed plot to replace her with a new queen, the king's own daughter-in-law, Mary Howard, who had recently been widowed. But there was other dark planning afoot. Mary's brother had different plans for her. He wanted her to marry Thomas Seymour, Katherine Parr's ex, and from there, slide into the position of King Henry's mistress. Talk about messy. Luckily for Catherine, she was very well liked, especially by her own stepchildren. In fact, the future Elizabeth I of England was a stepchild Catherine was the closest with because they both shared a love of learning and language. At 11 years old, Elizabeth gifted her father and stepmother with a translation of Catherine's prayers or meditation in French, Italian, and Latin. Catherine would also take charge of Elizabeth's welfare after Henry's death. Before Henry VIII passed away in 1547, he made many provisions for Katherine Parr's future. Among them was the decree that she should take custody of his youngest daughter, the then 13-year-old Elizabeth Tudor. She also took another studious royal girl as her ward, the future 9 days Queen Lady Jane Grey. Unknowingly, Catherine mentored 2 queens of England. In 1547, Henry VIII was finally on his deathbed, and his last tribute to Katherine Parr was heartbreaking. Henry thanked God for finally delivering him so faithful a spouse. He showed his thanks by bestowing Catherine a £7,000 pension, which is millions of dollars a year in today's money, plus the right to keep all of the Queen's jewels and clothes. So clearly he died feeling a sense of immense gratitude towards her. On January 28, 1547, Henry officially passed away, leaving Catherine as Queen Dowager. She was, of course, supposed to take care of his daughter Elizabeth and presumably stay close to her beloved stepson Edward. But instead, one scandalous decision tore the family apart forever. Catherine ended up having no role in the reign of her beloved stepson, partly because she scandalously married her true love, Thomas Seymour, less than 4 months after Henry's death. After all, the king was barely one to wait between his marriages, so why should she? At the age of 35, Catherine became pregnant for the first known time. She had never been able to get pregnant in any of her first 3 marriages, so this must have come as a welcome surprise. You would think she would be happy since she was now finally having a baby with the love of her life. But by this point, her fairy tale union with Thomas had turned into a living nightmare of the worst kind. After moving in with Catherine, Thomas started showing his true colors. It turns out he was a major creep. It wasn't long before he became inappropriate with her young stepdaughter Elizabeth Tudor. Apparently, Thomas would surprise the girl in bed at odd hours for horseplay and even tried to kiss her. Initially, Catherine brushed off his attention as innocent. As if to demonstrate his lack of harm, she sometimes joined in on the romps and helped hold Elizabeth down as Thomas tickled her. Yikes. But at one point, this ended with her husband playfully cutting the girl's dress to bits, which was clearly more than a red flag. As Catherine advanced in her pregnancy, her husband's attention to Elizabeth became increasingly inappropriate until the situation finally exploded in May of 1548. The tension climaxed with Catherine finding Thomas and Elizabeth in an embrace. What exactly happened is ambiguous, but it definitely ended up with Elizabeth being sent away from her favorite stepmother's home. She might have been sent away for her own protection, to remove her as a third wheel in Catherine's longed-for domestic bliss, or to preserve everyone's reputation, or some combination of the three. In any case, while they had once been incredibly close, Catherine and Elizabeth would never see each other again, which is very sad when you consider their kind of bond. Soon after, Catherine gave birth to her only child, Mary Seymour, in late August of 1548. But what should have been the happiest day of her life soon turned dire. She suffered from postnatal complications and ended up passing away just 8 days later, at the age of 36. Despite being known as the one who survived, Catherine outlived Henry VIII by less than 2 years. Her ending is extra sad considering how she narrowly avoided the executioner's sword. You see, Catherine knew about the fates of the wives who had come before her, and she knew that she was playing a dangerous game with Henry. In order to avoid his wrath, she had to hide a dark secret. She was a Protestant, pitting her directly against her husband. In 1546, Lord Chancellor Thomas Wriothesley and the Catholic faction at court plotted to nail her as a heretic. Many suspect that this was done so Askew would give up Catherine and her close ladies-in-waiting as Protestant themselves. Either way, it didn't work, as Anne Askew was burned without ever implicating the Queen. But that didn't spell the end of danger for Catherine. I mean, spousal disagreements should not end in arrest. But that's exactly what happened in 1546. Henry's suspicions about Catherine's radical beliefs were inflamed by some religious argument between them. Apparently convinced of her heresy, Henry signed a warrant for the arrest of his 6th wife. As Catherine's arrest warrant was drawn up in 1546, rumors swelled that Henry's wandering eye had resurfaced. Most scandalously, the alleged other woman was Catherine Brandon, the widow of his late best friend, who was also Catherine's own good friend and lady-in-waiting. Nevertheless, the whispers came to nothing. It's generally agreed that by this point, Henry's sexual appetite might have been too battered by life to cheat. So why didn't Henry VIII go down as the king who executed half his wives? Well, Catherine was very lucky. Somehow the warrant for her arrest managed to fall conveniently outside her door. Maybe it was planted by an ally. This meant that the Queen got a life-saving heads up that her condemned predecessors like Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard did not. Armed with news of her impending arrest, Catherine came up with a plan. She was able to defend herself from Henry's rage with the ultimate weapons: complete self-deprecation and capitulation to his ego. The next time Henry talked religion with her, Catherine claimed she only argued with him in order to distract him from his festering leg wounds. She also yearned for his wisdom. After all, Catherine was, in her own words, but a woman with all the imperfections natural to the weakness of my sex. Despite her vigorous education and writing career, Catherine would never assume to know better about religion than her husband, and he bought it. After all, entering the dating scene again, especially at his current stage of health, would have been a bit much. Despite his forgiveness, Henry didn't have enough time or will to call off her arrest. The Lord Chancellor and guards came to follow through with the warrant against Catherine while she was in front of the king himself, and Henry angrily ordered them away, saving Catherine's life. After the king's passing, Catherine finally felt safe enough to come out as a full-blown Protestant. This is evident in her final 1547 book, Lamentations of a Sinner, where she makes an argument for the then radical doctrine of salvation based on faith alone. Such beliefs ran completely counter to the doctrine of the Catholic Church, and most fatally her last husband, Henry VIII. But let's be honest, waiting until Henry's death to vocalize her full beliefs is completely understandable considering what happened to the wives that came before her. Katherine Parr's life was a testament to the precarious existence of women in Tudor England, where intelligence and ambition could be both a blessing and a curse. While she managed to escape the fate of Henry VIII's beheaded queens, her journey was fraught with danger, heartbreak, and betrayal. Her survival was not simply a matter of luck. It was the result of careful maneuvering, deep understanding of court politics, and an ability to adapt to the whims of a mercurial and increasingly volatile king. However, even after Henry's death, her story did not end in peace. Instead, she found herself entangled in another tragic chapter, one that would ultimately lead to her untimely demise. Her marriage to Thomas Seymour was supposed to be the culmination of her personal happiness, a chance to finally be with the man she truly loved. Yet instead of a fairy tale ending, it became a nightmare. The man for whom she had risked everything turned out to be dangerously reckless, his inappropriate behavior toward the young Elizabeth Tudor casting a dark shadow over their union. Catherine's final months were spent in turmoil, her home no longer a refuge but a source of scandal and distress. Her long-awaited pregnancy, which should have brought her joy, instead led to her tragic end. The woman who had outlived Henry VIII, outmaneuvered her enemies, and skillfully navigated the treacherous Tudor court, was ultimately undone by childbirth complications, an all too common fate for women of her time. In the grand narrative of Henry VIII's reign, Katherine Parr is often overshadowed by the more dramatic stories of Anne Boleyn's downfall or Catherine Howard's tragic youth. However, her story is just as compelling, if not more so. She was a woman who knew how to wield power in a world that sought to deny it to her. She was a survivor, but she was also a pioneer, a woman who dared to challenge the conventions of her time and leave a lasting impact on history. While her life ended far too soon, her story continues to captivate and inspire, a testament to the resilience and complexity of one of England's most remarkable queens.